Good morning, Arnold. I know you were talking about where were you on this? What'd you say?
Where were you 5 years ago?
Okay, I don't know what I had for breakfast though.
No kidding.
I know. So I don't.
Where are we? Who are you?
I don't know. Oh, don't start. I know we're of that age.
We are of that age.
Okay.
So here's something to remember, folks, as we return to civility. When at lunch or dinner, and you're seated with your back to the speaker, turn your chair around to face the speaker. That way you won't be twisting around during the speech or turning your back on the person seated next to you. You know, I know a lot of people, when they get to a banquet type setting, they'll grab those seats so they don't have to turn around.
Right. They do.
On the round table.
And I always get the one where my back's to the speaker.
I do too.
But I turn around.
I do too.
You know,
I turn that chair completely around.
Heck yeah.
And when they're having, you know, the big shindig going on.
And then I try to get in the way of the people behind me.
You try to move your head back and forth.
They got there early, right? I'm kidding. It's a joke.
Mark's partially returning to civility there.
No.
So when you're at a lunch or dinner meeting and seated with your back to the speaker, turn your chair around and face the speaker. That's just being civil, folks. And we're always facing this particular speaker because he is like an expert in Route 66 or Route 66, however you want to say it.
I say route.
I do too.
I think the dictionary says route. And I've had spirited discussions with friends about whether it's route or route. And we'll have to ask Joe.
We'll have to ask him.
Joe probably. Joe's the expert on if it's route or route.
Yeah, he is.
Because he also does traffic reporting.
So he would know.
You would think. I bet he calls it route. I bet he
we'll ask him. Joe Sonderman, he's been a radio personality and traffic reporter for almost 40 years, born and raised in Missouri, in St. Louis, matter of fact. He is an expert on ROUTE 66. He's written more than 15 books, and I think, Joe, I counted like 20 on 66. He's got a 1904 World's Fair book out, St. Louis Bridges and Highways and Roads. He's got an extensive ROUTE 66 postcard collection. And I guess my favorite is this 57 Chevy Bel Air that's like this turquoise. Oh, it's great looking. Joe, welcome to St. Louis in Tune.
Well, it's great to be here. It's Root, by the way.
There we go. Yes, wait. I'm with you, Joe.
And you know why? Because that's the song. Get your kicks on Route 66.
That's
so
right.
You got to say Root because of the song. So we'll go with that. We'll go with Root.
I'm with him on that.
What was Cookie was one of the guys on that show?
Cookie. No, is it Cookie?
Cookie?
Yeah, and I'm with Joe on that and when I get in those spirited conversations, I always say it's Route 66. Don't you remember the TV show? Of course, there's a lot of folks that go, "What? What TV show?"
Yeah, and I think a lot of it's where you were raised, at what part of the state or the country. That's how they kind of identify that. Joe's not here to talk about that. He's talking about his new book, This Day in St. Louis History: The Remarkable, the Outrageous, the Spectacular, and Everything in Between. I went immediately to the date of my birth, Joe, as I'm sure everybody does, and saw what was going on that particular time. What was the impetus behind getting this book together?
You know, it's funny because I've been collecting this stuff for years. It started when I was at KLOU, and we were an oldies station at the time, and I wanted to do a This Day in History thing. And This Day in History, if you're a radio host, is always a good way to kill 5 or 10 minutes, you know.
Yeah.
And when I started collecting them, when I was a kid, remember the old Globe Democrat used to publish This Day in History?
Yes.
And I used to clip those out, and I saved those. And so I put all that in a database, and then I started adding the rock and roll stuff, and I started adding all the Route 66 stuff. And before you know it, I had this big database. So it made a great morning show feature, and then I decided, well, let's do a book. And so here we are today with the book on This Day in St. Louis history.
You know, I was wondering, and you kind of answered the question, you know, was it difficult to find something going on every single day in St. Louis history in the calendar?
It wasn't. As a matter of fact, there's so much that I could easily have doubled the number of things I put in there.
Mm-hmm.
As it is, I only have room for 1, 2, maybe 3 things per day, and I have a Facebook page called Vintage St. Louis, And I bet you there are 10 to 12 things every single day. That's how historic St. Louis is and how much cool stuff there is.
So obviously a lot of historical things. You have also some outrageous thing. What is one outrageous thing that people would be like, what?
I think there was so much that I learned. I think the thing that I like learning the most is where all our place names come from, and who all these people were that our road names are named from, and who our communities are named after. Who was Ferguson? Who was William Ferguson, the guy who settled there? Who was James Kirkwood? Who was Pierre Ledoux? Who are all these people named after him? So I think some of the and of course there's the outrageous stuff. There's the crime, and there's the sensational stuff. There's the disasters, the tornadoes, the floods, that sort of thing. And it's hard to pick one or two things because there was just so much. I mean, you can just pick today, for example. You just pull September 24th, and you've got a cool Civil War item where Major James Morgan Utz, Paul Fuse, and 3 other conspirators were captured at Clayton and Ballas Roads. They were carrying contraband medicine to the rebels near Manchester. Well, do you recognize the name Fuse from that? And, they became well known for their auto dealerships. And the funny thing is, they hung Major Utz and they pardoned Major Fuse. So if they hadn't pardoned him, we might not have these auto dealerships that we have today. And that's just today. So you can just, it's like throwing a dartboard. Calendar, you can just pick one thing and one day, and I guarantee you can find something that's interesting. Today is the anniversary of the Cardinals' very first pennant win on this in 1926, and today is also the anniversary of Jose Oquendo putting on the catcher's garb against New York, and the secret weapon, we called him. He became the first National League player in 70 years to play all 9 positions in a single season. So that is just today, told at random. And like you mentioned, a lot of people go to their birthday and whatever, and I guarantee you can find 3 or even 4 things that are interesting on any given day.
So do you have a favorite date of all of these ones that are going on here, or multiple stories?
It's funny. I get asked that, and I do have a favorite date. It's April 30th.
That's your birthday. Is that your birthday, Joe?
That is not my birthday.
Okay.
I just find that it's a very eventful day because not only is it the day the Louisiana Purchase was approved, which is very important if you're into St. Louis history, but it's the day that the 1904 World's Fair opened, and it's the day that they named the route between Chicago and Los Angeles. The route between Chicago and Los Angeles. It was originally supposed to be US 60. And they changed that to 66. What happened was the fellow who, one of the people on the committee that laid out the route numbers on the United States highway system, they were supposed to give the important routes numbers ending in 0. And he managed to get Route 60 routed past his gas station in Tulsa and got number 60 assigned to it. His name was Cyrus Avery. We call him the father of Route 66. But what happened was the governor of Kentucky intervened. He got mad because he said 60 is a major transcontinental highway and it should go through my state. And he held up the whole thing. And so angry telegrams flew. There was a chance that the whole federal highway system wouldn't pass and they wouldn't get anything done and they wouldn't get anything numbered until Missouri's highway department engineer noticed that no one was using 66. And he said to himself, well, that's kind of catchy. And that's good because Get Your Kicks on Route 60 sucks. Nobody would, that would be a terrible song. Yeah. And nobody's going to buy Phillips 60 gas. And, so it's a good thing they settled all that. So that's all of that is on April 30th.
That's amazing.
Yeah. I just love listening to these stories, Joe. These these are fantastic.
And you can pick a date. You can pull up any date, and there's at least one thing like that. That's the amazing thing. That's, I think, the most amazing fact that I found out when writing this book is just how much stuff there is, and just how much interesting stuff there is in St. Louis. And I tried to focus kind of on our lifetimes, so there would be things we remembered. And I tried to really focus on a lot of pop culture stuff, on a lot of movies, television, radio, and that sort of thing. So it would be things that people remembered, like the SS Admiral and the Coral Court and all that stuff.
I now, when I brought the book home, You're right. The first thing I did was turn to my birthday, and then I went, oh, wait a minute. What about my wedding anniversary day?
Right.
What about my mom's birthday? I caught myself going to all the dates that meant something to me. And then I put it down, and my son Michael came in and he went, oh, what is this? And he's sitting there for like 15 or 20 minutes going through the book, reading stuff. And it just kind of triggers so much. It's a fun book. That's what I want to. It's
right. Good. That's good to hear.
Yeah, it's a really fun book, and we were in the kitchen just sitting around, just talking about these dates, and then it would trigger things. We were talking about the World's Fair. I think we actually came across it because we started talking about the World's Fair fence that ran along
Forest
Park Parkway that they just recently. I say recently, but they took down and then put a replica of it up. But we talked. It started a lot of conversations. What a fun book, though.
Well,
and it takes you down rabbit holes.
Yes.
You might start to talk about one thing, and next thing you know, you're off on another tangent.
Exactly.
That's the show. we do that. We stay focused, but we go down rabbit holes.
Yeah. Arnold has big ears. He has big ears and a little furry tail.
And Mark, what you said is really true. It spurs conversations in families that you don't have to kind of urge things on, they kind of develop amongst themselves.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Joe
brought it home.
Something that was so humorous that you started laughing when you found it out. Like occasionally, like I read something that's like, I started laughing, and it's not even a joke, but it's like, seriously? What was that?
I always wondered, I found out, gosh, it's so hard to pick one thing, especially since I don't actually have the book in front of me at this particular moment. But I think some of the things I laughed at, for example, is who is Plaza Frontenac named after?
Oh,
why do we have a Frontenac, Missouri? Why it's named after the Count de Frontenac. And I laughed because I thought, well, that's Plaza Frontenac. It would be named after a count. And the fellow who laid out the subdivision in Frontenac named it after a count. So I laughed at stuff like that. I laughed about, where the name, what does Florissant mean, for example? And it's French, Une Ville Florissante, or Flourishing Valley. Who was James Kirkwood, who was the fellow, he was an engineer for the railroad, and they laid out the town. It was the first planned community in the United States. Pierre Ledoux, I mentioned him. Yeah. He was a fellow who had a farm, and the road ran to his farm, and so we have Ledoux. But, that road also ran by families by the name of McCausland, and, so you just learn all that stuff. And like I said, it's extremely hard to narrow down one thing.
Wow. We're talking to Joe Sonderman. He is the author of the new book, This Day in St. Louis History, and it's available through Reedy Press. And Joe, you've got, my gosh, a lot of book events coming up, book signings, book presentations, that some that have already occurred, but you still have some coming up. One is at the Carondelet Historical Society on the 29th of September, October 5 at the Missouri History Museum, the 6th at the Missouri Botanical Garden, the 12th of October at Barnes & Noble in Fenton, October 22nd at St. Charles County Library at the Spencer Branch, and then November 4th at the Kirkwood Public Library, and that's a Monday. And my gosh, I guess you're just going to keep getting these dates going and going and going, kind of like the Energizer Bunny.
I appreciate you mentioning them too, especially that one's at Barnes & Noble, because that's where the one where I really hope people show up, because you know how authors are. We have a nightmare of sitting at a table at a Barnes and Noble and no one around you.
You mean you don't pay people to come, give them a cup of coffee or some kind of gift to show up?
If they're lucky, if you come to the library presentations, I will give a presentation. And, so we talk about what I do at these presentations is we talk about what I think are the 10 most significant dates in St. Louis history. And, the number one is kind of controversial. So I like to kind of stir the pot a little bit when I say what are the most significant days in St. Louis history. And we also talk about what I think are the most important sports days in St. Louis history. And then we talk about things we did just for the sheer hell of it, just for the fun of it. Fun events like the first Beatles concert here and the first Rolling Stones concert and Elvis playing here and the Forest Park Highlands fire and so on and so forth. Just fun things.
Oh, so tease our audience a little bit. I'm not going to ask you what the number one was, but
I'll tell you.
Okay. So this will help, get some folks to these events, and we will post those on the podcast page when we get done, and we'll also repeat those again. But again, Arnold Strick with Mark Langston of St. Louis in Tune, talking to Joe Sonderman about his book, This Day in St. Louis History. Folks, you need to get this book. It's a great family. I'm going to quote Mark. It spurs conversation with the family members. And Joe's got all these signings coming up. Go ahead, Joe.
No, I was going to say that I think the most significant day in St. Louis history is what we call the Great Divorce. And that's going to trigger a conversation. Do you know what the Great Divorce is?
No.
Yes, we do. I do.
Do you?
Yes.
You do.
Yeah. It wasn't my practice wife. That wasn't. It wasn't.
Well, maybe it was for you, Mark.
Maybe it was. Yeah. That's the day that St. Louis City and County were separated. And I argue that the day St. Louis City and County were separated is the most important because that's where a lot of our region's problems come from.
No kidding.
And
yes.
Where we have all this fragmentation because we have so many municipalities and because the city and county are at odds all the time. And a lot of people in the county think that the city doesn't matter and vice versa. And I argue that is to blame for a lot of our problems. So, and people always come up to me afterwards and say, well, how can you say that's more important than the day the city was founded, or the day the Eads Bridge opened, or the day that Charles Lindbergh made his first flight? And again, I just argue that impactfully, and also it's just an excuse to stir the pot a little bit.
Okay, so I'm going to stir the pot a little bit, Joe, because I saw you wrote something one time that said, you want to see two things before you die. And one was the Blues win the Stanley Cup.
Ooh.
And they did.
Yeah.
And the other one was the city and county get back together. How long are you going to live, man?
I don't think that one's going to happen. But I tell you what, the regions that are kicking our ass, Kansas City, Indianapolis, Louisville, and all that, they all have regional government.
You're correct.
And they all have regions that cooperate with each other. And right now they are killing us because, they work for one common goal, and that is to promote their area. But if you tell that to some people, it's just not a very popular point of view because they'll argue that, well, I'm living out here in my case, Hazelwood. And how does what happens in the city of St. Louis affect me? Well, it does, because when CEOs from out of town read about St. Louis, they don't differentiate between Hazelwood and Chesterfield and St. Charles and the city of St. Louis. It's all one to them. They say, I'm not going to relocate my headquarters to St. Louis because it has so many problems. Because look at all these stories about crime, and look at all these stories about the problems that the city have. And people don't like to hear that, but it's the absolute truth. If you live in St. Charles, by golly, it does affect you. And blight spreads, and the problems of the city are eventually going to reach St. Charles, and you can put your head in the sand and say that's not going to happen, but it is.
Well, and that's very similar to I believe it. I'll just go ahead and say this, like Chesterfield saying, "Well, we're going to part ways with St. Louis County and keep the money, and we don't want to have it spread out to Pine Lawn or up to Calverton Park or anything like that, to those areas that are in need." Because this is our money, we raised it, and it's an understanding. It's this attitude that is like, hey, it's mine, rather than, yes, we need to help the entire region grow and the entire region reach a minimum level of living. And it's a selfish attitude.
That's the truth. That's the very truth. That's the truth. So this is the very conversation that getting up there and saying that spurs. You can argue that the World's Fair was the most significant day in St. Louis history because of, but I think we focus too much on the World's Fair.
Because of hot dogs. We got hot dogs out of the World's Fair. That's what they say. I'm sorry. I know.
Yeah, you got hot dogs and ice cream cones and Dr. Pepper and all that stuff was popularized at the World's Fair.
Well, how do people respond when you engage in those conversations with them, and are you able to, and it's not meant to try to convince someone; it's just try to help people think and start a conversation.
Yeah, and you kind of answered the question the way I would. It's not an effort to convince them; it's an effort to it's not an effort to make them see my point of view. It's just an effort to spur the conversation. And I think it's a conversation we just need to have about the region and everything. And I know that I'm beating my head up against the wall thinking the city and the county are ever going to get back together. That's silly. But, but I still like to have the conversation and still get people to think about it.
So let's take a little off ramp for a minute. And how'd you get that 57 Chevy?
Do you know what? I have had that car. I have had a 57 Chevrolet. My first 57 was when I was 17, and I've had them, and I'm 62 now. And I've had this car since, the mid-1980s.
Wow.
And I had it restored in the late 1980s, sunk a bunch of money into it, and I haven't had to do much to it since. So, I don't drive it as often as I used to. Lately, it kind of sits in the garage a lot more, simply because when you drive it so much, you worry about the car. But I've had that car since the mid 1980s, back when you could afford them.
Right.
When, you could. I always tell the story. There was, you could get parts. You could go down to Taylor's salvage yard on the Rock Road, where the old Olympic Drive-In was, and you could take in a box, and they'd charge you $5 for the box full of parts. Now you can't do that anymore, but back then you certainly could.
Do you go to these old, car shows and that are in various locations, and they pop the hood and everything? Do you go to those things and show off the car?
I do some, but it was a driver for so many years. It's not a high point show car. I mean,
Gotcha.
You can't drive those vehicles, and I know I love people who have them and who can spend $100,000 on a frame off restoration, but a lot of those people, at car shows, you have to compete against cars that were brought there on a trailer and everything. And the other thing too, after a while with car shows, is you win trophies at car shows. What do you do with all those? What do you do with all those trophies?
Out there in a box in the basement.
They just gather dust in the basement along with the old soccer trophies and the old Boy Scout trophies and the old things like that. So I don't show it as much as I used to, but I still do occasionally. I'm going to do the Chain and Rocks Bridge car show, which is coming up in October, just because I just love to sit out on the bridge and just feel the breeze and talk to people and meet people and and like you said, just have conversations. Everything I do is about having conversations.
Now, is that an automatic, the 57, or is it
an automatic? It's what they call a power glide, which is this cast iron monstrosity that it's sluggish. Automatic transmissions in 1957 weren't the smoothest or the fastest things in the world, so it's not a fast vehicle if it has an automatic transmission.
Yeah, I didn't know if it was 3 on the tree, or is it like push button start, or is it like foot start, or is it a key start?
It's a foot start.
It's a foot start.
It's a key start.
Okay.
And it's funny that you mentioned the 3 on the tree, because my first one was, and how many people now can even drive a 3-speed on the column like that?
Right.
This day and age, those cars would be steel proof. No one would be able to steal them because they wouldn't know how to drive them.
That's true.
But the V8s were usually automatics. So it's a 283. So it's
great engine.
Said, it's not fast.
Yeah.
No one's they've made that motor until the 1960s. And it's not fast, but it's going to go forever, even though I've had the engine rebuilt. So I love talking about 57 Chevys.
I love it, and I like what he said. They were affordable.
Yep.
Yeah, they were affordable, and
They were.
It's a Chevrolet. It was the great diplomatic car, the great American. And the 57 is I'm sorry, but for all the modern vehicles, there's nothing on the road today that can even touch a 57 Chevy, from design, from looks, from dependability. There's nothing made today that's like it.
No.
They're coming back with the looks, but maybe not the dependability.
No.
And they were tanks too.
Yeah, that it's a tank. Every now and again, I have to pick her. Every now and again, I might have to pull a Subaru out of the grill.
We're going to take a break here, and we'll be right back for our next segment. You're listening to St. Louis in Tune with Arnold Stricker and Mark Langston on the U.S. Radio Network. This is Arnold Stricker of St. Louis in Tune on behalf of the Dred Scott Heritage Foundation. In 1857, the Dred Scott decision was a major legal event and catalyst that contributed to the Civil War. The decision declared that Dred Scott could not be free because he was not a citizen. The 14th Amendment, also called the Dred Scott Amendment, granted citizenship to all born or naturalized here in our country and was intended to overturn the U.S. Supreme Court decision on July 9, 1868. The Dred Scott Heritage Foundation is requesting a commemorative stamp to be issued from the U.S. Postal Service to recognize and remember the heritage of this amendment by issuing a stamp with the likeness of the man Dred Scott. But we need your support and the support of thousands of people who would like to see this happen. To achieve this goal, we ask you to download, sign, and share the one-page petition with others. To find the petition, please go to dredscottlives.org and click on the Dred Scott Petition Drive on the right side of the page. On behalf of the Dred Scott Heritage Foundation, this has been Arnold Stricker of St. Louis in Tune.
St. Louis in Tune strives to bring you informative, useful, and reflective stories and interviews about current and historic issues and events that involve people, places, and things. Our topics cover a wide range, such as the arts, crime, education, employment, faith, finance, food, health, history, housing, humor, justice, and even sports. And that's just to name a few. While St. Louis in Tune originates from the Gateway City and covers local topics, we connect to what is going on nationally as well. If you enjoy what you hear, please take time and like and share and subscribe to this show and listen to other previous shows that can be found on our website, stlintune.com. That's stlintune.com. Or on your favorite podcast platform. That's stlintune.com. stlintune.com. And if you've got an idea that you'd like for us to examine a little deeper, let us know by dropping us a note at stlintune@gmail.com. That's stlintune@gmail.com. St. Louis in Tune, heard Monday through Friday on the usradionetwork.com and many great radio stations around the U.S. and, of course, right here in St. Louis. Our website again is stlintune.com.
Welcome back to St. Louis in Tune with Arnold Stricker and Mark Langston. We are talking to Joe Sonderman about his new book, This Day in St. Louis History. And Mark, I was looking at January the 1st.
Oh, okay.
And January 1st, 1926, the Shell Building at 13th and Locust opened. It's just down the road from where I live.
Yeah.
And it's now a hotel. But at the time, Shell was known as this is why you need to get this book, folks. It's just full of history. It was known as the Roxana Petroleum Company. The name was changed in 1928, and the building serves as the Shell Oil Company headquarters until 1940. It was designed by, now get these last names, James Jameson Avenue, and George Spirrell. The rounded building is patterned after the Shell Oil Company's logo. And during the 1930s, General James H. Doolittle, leader of the famous bombing raid on Tokyo during World War II, worked here and was in charge of the company's aviation department. Joe, you just blew my mind there. In just that one day, I've learned 3 different things I never knew before.
See, isn't that, and that's wild. And you can just pick at random, pick a day. And I love reading about things like that. And I love reading about the Ferris wheel and the World's Fair and the controversy over it, whether the axle is buried in Forest Park or not, which it's not, for crying out loud. It's not.
What? Come on.
Oh, yeah.
I've been out there with a metal detector looking for it.
For his whole life, he's been doing that.
That's another conversation.
It's another whole show.
It's mentioned, yeah, you want to start an argument in St. Louis, mention that. Or mention that the ice cream cone wasn't really invented at the World's Fair, and you're going to start an argument.
These are hot buttons,
that it was around, prior to that there had been a cone patented as early as 1903. But, those things were popularized at the World's Fair. So I just, that you can just, like you said, pick a day at random. You pick January 1st and I met some of the exciting things that happened today and some of the events that are coming up. later on this month. This week, we've got the anniversary, for example, of the last Browns game, which were in 1953. And the anniversary of the 66 Park-In opening is coming up in 1947. And I missed the 66 Drive-In. They tore it down for a grocery store, but I'm not bitter.
No, I'm not either. I'm with you on this, Joe.
Speaking of dates, September 29th, Joe is going to be at the Carondelet Historical Society. On October the 5th, he's going to be at the Missouri History Museum. October the 6th at the Missouri Botanical Garden. And this is, if you missed those, here's the one you need to go to, Barnes & Noble down in Fenton on Saturday, October 12th. You need to show up for that one, folks. That's a big one.
Do you have an address on that, where that is?
At Barnes & Noble, that's 721 Gravois Road.
Oh.
That's kind of down by the Gravois Mills shopping area down there.
Okay.
Also, October 22nd, St. Charles County Library, Spencer Branch. November the 4th at the Kirkwood Public Library. And then November 19th at the Warrenton Public Library. They call it Warrenton. It's Warrenton.
Warrenton.
Yeah, Warrenton Public Library. So
you
got to go check those out, folks. Listen to Joe talk about the book. Get the book signed, especially the one down at Barnes & Noble.
That's quite a list of stuff.
He's busy. He's a busy guy.
It keeps me out of trouble. It keeps me out of the casino.
Oh.
Okay. So here's a question.
Uh-oh.
When did you become interested in Route 66? At what time in your life?
You know, it's a funny story. I was raised by a man who on family vacations wouldn't stop if his ass was on fire and his britches were catching. He wouldn't stop. He wouldn't stop for anything.
Like my dad.
Stopped when exactly. And again, everybody can relate to this story. We stopped when he needed a cigarette or he had to go to the bathroom. And it was all about getting there as quickly as possible. And I made a promise to myself. These were on journeys to the Lake of the Ozarks, which has a roadside culture of its own. And I made a promise to myself that when I got older, I was going to stop at every 2-bit deer farm, snake pit, souvenir stand, tourist trap. I was going to see every one of those that I missed as a kid. Dog patch at the Lake of the Ozarks, that sort of thing. And I've done it. And I had a stressful job. This again dates back to the KLOU days. I was working with someone who was very difficult. And one day I just got enough. And I had read a book by Michael Wallace called Route 66, The Mother Road, and he's our Yoda. His writing is incredible. And I got so frustrated, I threw the headphones down, walked out of the studio, got in the car, and I headed west. And I didn't stop until I got pulled over by the highway patrol, and somebody said, "Joe, there's a missing persons report out on you. People would like to know where the hell you are."
Oh my!
And that's how interested.
Wow.
In 66, I ended up at Devil's Elbow, Missouri, the first place where I ended up. And I was so enamored by the scenery that I saw and the fact that the road got so far away from the interstate and how beautiful it was and how magnificent it was that I thought, geez, what are the other 2,000 miles like? And I wanted to see it all. And that's what happens is you realize when you're out on Route 66 that every mile has stories. Okay, a lot of people look at Route 66 and they see all these old abandoned buildings and they see the things that are derelict and they see blight. And I look at that and I see a story of a family who made their living alongside the road and who were doing quite well. And then one day the interstate came and it took them away from them, took all that away from them. And it makes you recognize that time and life is precious. Mm-hmm. And that if you don't slow down occasionally, life will pass you by. Mm. And don't get me wrong, we still have to have the interstate. We have to have it. I mean, you can't imagine commerce or business or the volume of traffic on I-44 today going down that little narrow 2-lane road. But every now and again, when you're in the mood to slow down and you're not in a hurry, take the time, get off on the 2-lane. And what happens is, 66 goes through the towns and you meet the people in the towns. And this country, we are so polarized now because all we do is we sit in front of our computers and we yell at each other in all caps because you didn't vote for the same crook that I did. And we've become disconnected from society. And when you get out on Route 66, you realize there's this whole great big world out there where people still talk to each other. You meet people on Route 66 you wouldn't have a conversation with in St. Louis or at your home. You as well. He's a Trumper. But then you start to realize, you have more in common than you do in differences. And that's why Route 66 is very important to me, because they're still out there pumping your gas, and the waitress is still out there, with the coffee pot welded to her finger, and she still cracks her gum and calls you hun, and all of that is still out there waiting for you if you just slow down a little bit and get off the interstate.
Now, Chicago to L.A.?
Los Angeles, yep, Santa Monica.
Okay, now have you done the entire route on Route 66?
It's funny you asked me that. I've only done that once because it's so much.
I bet.
Because I find now that I like doing it in segments.
Mm-hmm.
How long did it take, Joe, to drive?
You have to give yourself, if you want to do it right and not rush, you have to give yourself at least a couple weeks if you're going to do the whole route. The only time I did it was in a 1993 Dodge Caravan that was filled with kids, and we still didn't get the smell out. And I didn't have a lot of fun because we were rushing to get to a certain place at a certain time, and you can't do that on Route 66. You have to allow time to run into people and to have conversations that you didn't expect. Route 66 isn't a road. It isn't pavement. It's people. And it's conversations, and it's meeting, and it's the unexpected. That's what is so cool about Route 66, because the interstate, everything is franchised. A hamburger at McDonald's in St. Louis tastes the same as one in Tucumcari, New Mexico, or in Needles, California. But when we were kids and we were growing up, food changed. It was different in New Mexico, and it's still that way on Route 66. Everything isn't generic. There's a Hampton Inn and there's nothing wrong with Hampton Inn. There's nothing wrong with Walmart, but they're the same at every interstate off-ramp. Every interstate off-ramp has the same fast food restaurants clustered there. But when you get into the towns, it's unpredictable. You might have the best hamburger you've ever had in your life. Well, who knows? It might be a crappy one too. But there's that element of unpredictability that we've lost in this country. And again, there's something to be said for when you're in a hurry. By golly, there's nothing wrong with McDonald's, bless their heart. And but every now and again, you want something different.
Right. Something I've noticed, especially in the St. Louis area, on Manchester and on, my mind, Chippewa, and then when Chippewa changes names to Watson, is because that's the real Route 66. Is there's signs that say historic Route 66, but it's like, okay, now you're confusing me, because when I was growing up, 66 was Chippewa and Watson. It wasn't Manchester. How does this all is everybody jumping on the bandwagon so they can get their little piece of the pie, Joe, or what's going on there?
It's Route 66 was evolving from the day it was commissioned in 1926, because, like my father, we were always trying to get there faster. So they were always building a new route or a faster way around. The original Route 66 in St. Louis is Manchester.
Really?
When it was originally laid out, Manchester was really the only improved road west. Wow. It's also, you might not realize, the only major route out of St. Louis that doesn't cross a major river.
We knew that on St. Louis in tune.
Yeah, that's right.
That's good.
Yeah, you knew that because it was the only one. And so from 1926 until 1933, Route 66 used Manchester. Okay. So that's your original Route 66.
Yeah.
And Watson, Chippewa, what you consider the classic Route 66 was city Route 66. What the main line of 66 actually used the Chain of Rocks Bridge and used Dunn Road and Lindbergh to go around the city so people could get through there faster. And so the main line of 66 is actually Dunn Road, Lindbergh, down through and out west. So it's confusing. You need a book or something to keep all these alignments straight. And may I suggest Route 66 St. Louis Style by Joe Sonderman. That will help you straighten out.
I heard he's done a couple of books on this thing.
Yeah, we've done a couple of books on the subject. So I delved into it probably much, much more than you cared to hear about all the various alignments and stuff. But St. Louis, out of all the major cities on the route, St. Louis is probably the hardest one to follow because especially in Metro East too, we were always trying to get the hell out of here quicker. And so they would move it. So they would change it.
Now, I heard that Paul McCartney of the Beatles, he at one point a few years back drove Route 66. Did you ever?
Yeah, he did.
Did he?
He did, with his girlfriend. And they ran into some people at a convenience store here, and he was spotted here for sure. And yeah, he drove Route 66. It's the Europeans and the people from overseas that really drive this thing. I would say when I'm traveling Route 66, I'd say better than 50% of the people I meet are from overseas. They are just fascinated by it. And I'll tell you why. There's a couple of reasons why. It symbolizes an America that they admire. And, you know, it's an era that, by golly, we were the greatest nation on earth. Not that we're still not, but we were feared by our enemies, respected by our friends. We put extra chrome on 57 Chevrolets, by God, just because we were America and we could do it that way. And I think it symbolizes that to them. But the other thing that we have on Route 66 that they don't is the sheer amount of room, the vastness of the American West. When you're in Europe and you drive 8 hours, you've gone through 2 or 3 countries.
Right. Yeah.
You know, here in the United States, you can drive for 2 days and still be in Texas.
Yeah.
And I think they're enamored by that. And they really drive it. Plus the books, the TV series. The TV series is in syndication over there. And particularly the Germans are very interested in Route 66 in the United States. And so they drive a lot of the travel over the route.
I'm glad you cleared that up for me, because I was driving down Manchester through Maplewood and out in the Brentwood area. And I was like, oh, why is that sign 66? And then, you know, what's going on in Watson? And that really clears things up. I never knew about the Dunn Road Lindbergh connection.
First time I ever heard of that.
Yeah. And that's actually the main route. So, you know, and a lot of communities now, especially in rural areas, are beginning to realize that Route 66 can drive tourism. So anytime there's an alignment, even 66, they even went through town for a couple of years, by golly, they're getting those signs up and they're getting those banners up because they realize it can attract tourism. And, you know, we have examples in around the St. Louis area of towns that have really embraced it. I'd say Pacific has really embraced it. Cuba, Missouri has really embraced it. And these small towns, you know, realize it drives tourism dollars.
And they need that, because even though they're on 44, they're a little disconnected from the main street. Main Street Pacific, Main Street Cuba. They don't go right through that, but 66 went right through there.
Right.
And, you know, you can especially recommend the Wagon Wheel Motel, which has been in business since 1936 and is the oldest still active motel on Route 66. And every town has a business or something. In Pacific, the Red Cedar Inn has been there since the 30s, and it's no longer an inn or a tavern anymore. It's now a visitor center and a welcome center. But every town and every mile has attractions and it has stories. Get yourself a book and find your route, so you know where you're going, and plan out a little bit in advance, but not too far in advance, because you want to allow for spontaneity.
So you could do like a day trip on Route 66 around here. And really,
that's the best way to do it.
Right.
Is just drive out to Cuba or drive out to Sullivan, check out the 2-lane there, and that 3-lane stretch of what's Business Loop 44 outside of Pacific is really cool. That stretch through town. There's a lot to see. And like we mentioned, Cuba and the other towns too. Watch it though; it's addictive. It's extremely addictive. And you'll also realize it's a different driving experience, because if you like to drive, you know, the interstate just blasts through obstacles.
Oh yeah.
Okay. Route 66 goes through the towns. It rises and falls with the land. It respects the land. It curves around hills and it curves around mountains, and it switchbacks up and down where it needs to. And it's not just a straight line trip through the desert like a lot of people might think.
Right.
And that's probably those business routes are the old Route 66. Those are the ones to kind of take then.
So it's easy to find in a lot of aspects, in a lot of places. It's still signed very well in Missouri and in Illinois. And you won't have a lot of difficulty without a book, but I still recommend Jerry McClanahan's Easy Guide to Route 66, and that'll keep you on the route and help you find your where you're headed.
Well, we're really appreciative of your time today, and we know that you got a busy life and a busy day ahead of you. But folks, you check out Joe's books on Route 66, but also this one. This is a great book to give as a gift. It's a great book just to kind of get and have some family discussions on this day in St. Louis history, the remarkable, the outrageous, the spectacular, and everything in between. It's by Reedy Press. It's a big 8.5 by 11 paperback with dozens of pictures and information in there that you will never go wrong with. Also, his book signings that are coming up. I want to highlight the Barnes & Noble book signing on October the 12th down in Fenton, 721 Gravois Road, but we will post those on the podcast page so you can get those.
I have an old, speaking of old history, radio history, let's see if I can play this here.
KXOK and Johnny Rabbit are giving away 100 tickets for the Beatles St. Louis engagement August 21st in Busch Memorial Stadium. To win one of the 100 choice seats, simply listen to the following scrambled Beatle hits. List them on a postcard in their order of appearance and mail your entry to Beatles KXOK St. Louis 13, Missouri. The first 100 entries with the correct answers in their order of appearance win. And now listen carefully. The first 100 entries to list the titles to those Beatle hits in their order of appearance win choice seats to the Big Beatle Show, August 21st in Busch Memorial Stadium. Send your entry on a postcard and mail to Beatles, KXOK, St. Louis 13, Missouri.
And that
Wow.
Oh, go ahead.
You know, the interesting thing about that concert, I don't know how much time you have, is that it was raining that night, if you recall. It was raining cats and dogs, and they actually rushed the Beatles on stage before some of the what were to have been the opening acts, which were the Circle and the Ronettes and Bobby Hebb. And so technically the Beatles opened for the Circle and the Ronettes and Bobby Hebb.
Wow.
They rushed them on stage to, get them. And that show was one of the ones that helped convince Paul that they should stop touring. The other Beatles had been trying to get Paul to stop touring for quite a while, but they had such a terrible experience at Busch Stadium night, and they had played a show in Cincinnati earlier in the day, that is one of the ones where Paul finally said, we need to think about not touring anymore. And they only played a couple more shows afterwards.
I'll be darned. See there, Joe, we have to have Joe back soon.
He's just a wealth of information.
I know, he's fun.
I thought he was the one announcing that on that KXOK commercial.
No.
No.
But he was talking about it earlier.
It did sound like how we were taught when I first started out, how we were taught at the old KHTR, which was 103.3. That is a little bit how we sounded.
Yep.
We were top 40 guys back then. Mark did it. Mark did it at WIL.
Stop. You got to quit now. Don't tell people this.
He was.
Joe.
He was the voice there.
No.
Before he was a mayor,
Right.
he was spinning records.
I know.
Joe, thanks very much. We really appreciate your time today.
We do. We had a great time.
Thank you, guys, and thank you for getting the book signings in there. And everyone, please come out, please.
We will encourage that, and you have a great day.
Take care, Joe.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. Take care.
You
Bye-bye.
too. Bye now. Isn't that great?
God, what a wealth of information.
Isn't he
on
fun?
that.
He is really fun. We need to bring him back soon.
Oh, yeah. We could just talk about whatever.
It's called This Day in St. Louis History, the remarkable, the outrageous, the spectacular, and everything in between. Pick your birth date and start there.
I'm showing this off on the
that
video.
That's the best place to start, isn't it?
Oh, it is. It is.
How would you not go anywhere? I know. That's what I did. That's what we did it around the house when we were looking at it in the kitchen.
So pick a date. Like I was wondering if he had February 29th in there, and he does.
Does he really?
He does. So
Does
let's. I want to read that one.
All
okay,
right.
just for
Does
fun.
he really? He has. Okay.
He has the 366th a day, and it's what kind of interesting. There's two events he has. John Leonard Roosevelt Martin, kind of known as Pepper Martin, was born in Temple, Oklahoma.
Oh.
He was the wild horse of the Osage, batted .500 in the 1931 World Series, starred for the Gas House Gang champions of 34. He was also one of the most colorful characters in Redbird history. He formed the Mississippi Mudcat Band with other players and entertained fans with jug and washboard country music. And also on February 29th, now that was in 1904. In 1960, the talk show era opened as KMOX aired the first At Your Service program.
Oh, it's been around since then.
Yes, wow. Jack Buck hosted the show with Mayor Raymond Tucker as the first guest. Eleanor Roosevelt also appeared on the first show. The idea of newsmakers taking calls from listeners was given little chance of succeeding, but Robert Hyland was so convinced that he ordered the station's record library given away.
Wow. Give it away.
What?
Wow.
That's crazy.
People do anything to get
so
it back.
Stuff like that, folks, that it's just little tidbits of St. Louis that's ingrained that we don't even know about when we drive around town, when we see signs, when we wonder why things are the way they are. It's a great book to find out some of those things, the remarkable, outrageous, spectacular, and everything in between. Great book, This Day in St. Louis History by Joe Sonderman.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
So what's the day of the day you have, Mark?
Oh, you've got you. Well, there's always something fun, I know, going on. Let's see. We have the Bluebird of Happiness Day. where
May the Bluebird of Happiness.
I know. Where did that come from? Bluebirds are known as the birds of happiness. Who knew? I had no idea.
It's the state bird of Missouri.
Yes, correct. Oh my goodness, yes, that's true. I forgot all about that. National Punctuation Day.
Every day should be.
Oh, there's a good one. Yeah,
yes.
Yeah, I know. That's National Voter Registration Day.
Okay, and that date to register to vote for the November election is coming up. I think it's October 8th or 10th, something like that. Don't quote me on that. But
so yeah, so don't get do it now, and do it. Yeah, do it now.
Vote early and vote often.
Yeah, that's what I always said. Yeah, yeah. Let's see. We have National Lobster Day. I hear there's becoming a shortage of lobsters.
Really?
Yeah, they're harvesting them all, and they're just what they've done to the oceans.
Over harvesting, yeah,
and all that kind of thing. And I really like them. National Cooking Day. You're the cook in your house, aren't you?
I love to cook. Yes.
Are you the cook?
Yes.
National Food Service Workers Day. There's not a whole lot going on. National One Hit Wonder Day. You did a show. We did a show.
Yeah.
On One Hit Wonders.
Yeah, that was fun.
That's maybe we should
amazing.
Bring that back. This
we
month
should
before the month is over with, because that was fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. National Roadkill Day.
How you want that cooked?
I don't know. World Pharmacist Day. You have to love your pharmacists. Hug a pharmacist today. Go to Walgreens or CVS
and get arrested when you do that.
I'll give you one more. There's not much more here, but there really isn't much. Johnny Appleseed Day's coming up in a little bit. We always used to go out and plant trees. Better Breakfast Day. Are you a breakfast eater?
I am. It depends upon what's going on, and sometimes we'll go on a Saturday to get a bigger kind of more
brunchy.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Brunchy is goody. Okay. All right.
But other than that, nothing brings neighbors together quite like cop cars in front of another neighbor's house. Let's see here. Japanese wisdom.
Okay.
If it's not yours, don't take it. If it's not right, don't do it. If it's not true, don't say it. If you don't know, shut up. If you can make somebody's day, make my day. You remember that? If you can make somebody's day, you should.
Yeah, that's good. I've got more chins than a Chinese phone book.
A man who is a master of patience is master of everything else. Once you carry your own water, you will learn the value of every drop. That's a good one.
That is. That's It's serious. These are all very serious.
Let's see here.
These are all very serious.
I don't understand how a cemetery can raise its funeral prices and blame it on the cost of living.
That's tough. It's a tough room.
My wife called to tell me she saw a fox on the way to work. I asked her how she knew it was on its way to work. Well, she hung up on me. When your children are teenagers, it's important to have a dog so that someone in the house is happy to see you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's about it.
And remember that if you work hard enough at your job, you get to do other people's work too.
That is so true. I'm glad you said that with enthusiasm.
And common sense is worth a lot of money,
Yes,
frankly. But common sense, it's not a gift.
Mm-mm.
It is a punishment because you have to deal with everyone who doesn't have it.
Get that horse out of here.
And I live in the South where lightning bugs use their blinkers more than drivers.
I love that. It's that lever on the left.
The National Weather Service, they just published an instruction book on how to bake a lasagna in your mailbox. And here's a pro tip. There's these amateur tips, and then there's pro tips a lot of times on doing a variety of things like gardening or cooking or cleaning your house. Well, here's a pro tip on napping, folks.
Okay.
If you want to nap while the kids are home, just say, wake me up in 30 minutes so we can clean the house. They will then do literally anything to avoid waking you up.
That's true. That's true.
And here are some great nicknames for coworkers.
Okay, good.
We talked about if you do your job, you get to do somebody else's. Here's great nicknames for coworkers. Lava lamp, looks good but not very bright. Deck chair, folds under pressure. Dr. Doolittle, the name says it all. 007, zero motivation, zero skills, 7 bathroom breaks. G-spot can never be found.
Wow.
And you will receive some parting gifts from us. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, and I'll close with this.
No, you're not going to close.
A fact is information minus emotion.
Mm-hmm.
An opinion is information plus experience. Ignorance is an opinion lacking information, and stupidity is an opinion that ignores a fact.
Very good.
That's just a prize for you.
Wow.
Okay, so
some good stuff. Good show today.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah. Tune in.
You need to tune into other shows, folks, that we have on stlontune.com. Mark and I love to have a lot of fun.
Yeah.
There are times when we have some really, really serious shows, but there's times we love to enjoy life and
goof off.
Yeah, and goof off. Yeah.
Goof off. Yeah.
But we do it within the realm of there are boundaries.
Really? Okay, you say so.
There are boundaries. Well, that's all for this hour. Thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, as I said earlier, you can listen to additional shows at stlintune.com. Consider leaving a review on Apple Podcasts, Podchaser, or your preferred podcast platform. Your feedback helps us reach more listeners and continue to grow. I want to thank Bob Berthasell for our theme music. Our guest today, Joe Sonderman, and co-host Mark Langston. We thank you, folks, for being part of our community of curious minds. St. Louis in Tune is a production of Motif Media Group and the U.S. Radio Network. Remember to keep seeking, keep learning, walk worthy, and let your light shine. For St. Louis in Tune, I'm Arnold Stricker.